Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we are ready to start. If you can find your seats. Okay, so we're a little bit late starting, but that's always what happens when you are trying to get many different people into the Parliament. And I think everybody's here safe and sound. So we're going to get started, and I am not going to speak much, but I'm going to pass straight away to MEP Manuela Ripa, and then on to Pascal Durand for the opening remarks, and then I'll explain a bit more about the event afterwards. Manuela.
Thank you very much, and a warm welcome from my side to all panelists and all participants at today's event on a need for an EU-wide list, positive list, in order to end the suffering of animals and pet trade, especially for wildlife animals. This event, as just mentioned by Nick, is co-hosted by Pascal and me in association with the Animal Advocacy and Protection, AAP, and the Eurogroup for Animals. And it is clear, I would say, that we all share a passion for changing the way we behave towards animals to better their lives and reduce the well-known risk to our health, environment, and biodiversity. So why is this event so timely? First of all, we are not only in the midst of a dramatic climate crisis, but also of a detrimental biodiversity crisis. The headless exploitation of nature by humans has led to unprecedented biodiversity loss and a worsening climate crisis. And wildlife trade, especially the illegal wildlife trade, is a driver of biodiversity loss and can vastly weaken wild populations of flora and fauna, and in some cases drive them to extinction. Moreover, unmanaged wildlife trade can be a source of the spread of zoonotic diseases with devastating results for our public health, as we just had to face with the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm sure nobody of us wants to go back to that. So, by the way, the European Union is a hub for global wildlife trafficking and therefore has a key role to play in the fight against it. And as the reported seizure and trade values of wildlife trade in the EU are steadily rising, the Commission finally came up with a revised action plan against wildlife trafficking. We recently debated this action plan in the Environment Committee, and the request for a positive list for wildlife trade was on the lips of many MEPs. And also, more and more member states are taking this extremely seriously, with new member states' positive lists being entrenched into law every year. We will hear about some member states like Cyprus and the Netherlands, as well as Belgium later on. And we have a number of experts guests today to explore a variety of aspects to do with current EU pet trade, from the issue brought from the EU wild animal pet trade through to the solution in the form of a EU positive list. We are joined by David van Gennep, CEO of AAP, for a keynote speech. AAP is a founding member of the European Alliance of Rescue Centers and Sanctuaries who experience firsthand the dangers of pet trade. We will hear about the current scale of the pet trade from independent researchers and how difficult it is actually to get data on how many pets are being kept and traded in the European Union. We will also hear about a feasible legal basis for an EU positive list from an independent law firm. And importantly, we will hear about the added value of an EU positive list and new investigations into the scale of pet trade and online trade. Let's just take my home country, Germany. There is a significant online trade in major live animal pet markets. In 2017, ProWildlife found over 100,000 animals from over 2,000 species that were available on these online platforms, and the numbers certainly raised over the years. Since 2017, there have been on average over 6,000 annual seizures involving CITES-listed wildlife in Europe. So the discussion today is particularly timely and important because the European Commission is now working on a study to assess the added value and feasibility of a EU positive list under their action plan. And an opinion poll in 2020 showed that almost 90% of interviewed EU citizens think that wild animals should definitely not be kept as pets. The European Parliament agrees, and we reiterated twice in resolutions, and the last one was last year, the call for EU member states to establish a science-based EU-wide positive list of animals allowed as pets under appropriate welfare conditions without harms to population in the wild and the European diversity. And an EU-wide approach is of extreme importance, as the lack of a common approach across the EU makes the true extent of trade flow difficult to monitor and the enforcement of existing rules almost impossible. And 19 member states made it clear that we need to investigate the added value of a new approach to a positive list of allowed pets. So let's make it happen. And I'm asking the Commission, why shall we wait for it? This should be included. This positive list should also be included in a new revision of animal welfare regulation, and the white paper launched today gives a legitimate route for that to happen. When I visited Europol in early January, it was clear that there's a link between the legal and the illegal trade. We need to severely tighten the rules across the EU on how we trade and keep pets, and I believe that a new positive list represents a simplified approach that adds value for enforcement organizations such as Europol. Now, I will hand over to Pascal, and I'm looking very much forward to this event today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Manuela. So I do apologize. I have to go to another meeting. I'm very sorry for that, because it's a very, of course, important topic. But it's the life of a member of European Parliament. You know what I mean. Okay. So as I read to read, I think it's better for you. So I will have heard from my colleague Manuela, there has been a big political support for an EU positive list within the Council and the Parliament. Since 2016 in the European Parliament, we had no less than 4 resolutions supporting the idea of an EU positive list. The latest one, adopted in November 2022, specifically called for the Commission to carry out an impact assessment of the added value and feasibility of establishing such a list. We welcome the upcoming feasibility study announced by the Commission in the action plan against wildlife trafficking. But this action plan must go beyond the current scope and include an assessment of all animals, including those bred in captivity. This is why we are here today, to hear about the findings and recommendations of an important white paper, but put together by Eurogroup for Animals and AAP, Animal Advocacy and Protection. Yeah. We are also here to have an open dialogue with member states, experts from Cyprus, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands to know more on how positive list legislation has been or is being developed in different countries. This can serve to share good practices to other member states thinking about adopting such lists, but it can also serve to feed the feasibility study directly. As my colleague Manuela explained, it is very surprising that some countries still allow exotic wild animals to be kept as pets for 3 main reasons. First, it is not good for the welfare of those animals, of course, as their owners often do not have the expertise to take care of them. Second, it's not good for our ecosystems, as those animals can become invasive species when abandoned or when they escape, like the monk parakeet, for instance, that we can see everywhere nowadays in Brussels. And third, finally, it is not good for our common health. Wild animals come from everywhere and are found in terrible conditions, which heightens the risk of triggering a new epidemic like the one we have been facing those last 3 years. We have a mechanism to tackle these problems in a precautionary way by only allowing animals whose positive welfare can be easily accommodated in the household. Let's use it. The Commission is revising animal welfare legislation as we speak. it should take into account in its upcoming initiative the welfare of wild animals treated as pets. I will now leave the floor to David Van Kennep, Executive Director at Animal Advocacy and Protection, the organization that wrote this white paper together with Eurogroup for animals. So thank you very much for your attention. And good conference, of course.
Okay, so thank you very much to our co-sponsors and MEPs. I'm going to pass straight on to David Van Kennep. And David, I think you're the best person to introduce yourself, and we really can't wait to hear about your experiences. So looking forward to it.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Thank you, Pascal and Manuela, for having this meeting. Let me start by saying how amazing it is to be here amongst so many good friends, but also to see the developments that this whole discussion about the positive list has gone through. If we would have organized this meeting 10 years ago, and I'm looking at Ilaria, who was in our midst in those days, but also Joe and others that we worked with closely, this would not have been possible a few years ago. So if I'm looking at evolution at this moment, I can only be very happy and very proud with what we achieved. I want to take you along through some examples that we encounter in our rescue center. But before doing so, can I have next slide? I would like to introduce myself very shortly. Next slide, please. So I'm a biologist from origin, and I was trained to be an immunologist and an ecotoxicologist, but I found the work with animal welfare far more interesting than the scientific work. So I joined several jobs, first in the ministry, and later on I moved to AP quite early in my career. So I'm part of the furniture, as they say. I've been here for more than 30 years, so I've seen quite some developments in this world. Nowadays, I'm a member of all kinds of boards. I'm also a proud member of the board of Eurogroup, which is for us a very strong supportive to bring this issue to the table, because without that kind of collaboration, we would not be here today. Further on, I'm a member of an advisory council of the Dutch Minister of Agriculture concerning animal welfare, which allows me also to be involved in many other aspects of animal welfare, which is very helpful to see also the interrelationship, like you're saying. I mean, there's more to it than just animal welfare. There's also the ecosystem and public health that we have to address. Can I have the next slide? So, just a few things about AP. We are founded officially in 72, which makes us 50 years old, which brings quite some experience, but also quite some data. And I want to stress that we are not only helping animals with their welfare, but we're also collecting data while doing so. We have our main office in the Netherlands, Almere, but we also run a rescue center in Spain, in Villena, where we also have about 100 animals. Looking at size, they say size doesn't matter, but it does to some extent. We have about 120 people employed, 117 if I see it on this slide. That was the state of affairs the 1st of January of this year. But that also allows us to work on issues quite intensively. We can really focus on things, and there's 3 major focuses that we have, which is the positive list being one of them. We are being supported by private people, so that makes us quite independent. We can move around as we like. Well, that's what I would like to say about it. Can I have next slide? This is the realism that we are facing every day. This is the statistics of the rescue requests that are being put on our doorsteps. The animals that we should rescue if we really wanted to do our work properly. Without really going in the exact numbers, I mean, you can see where this is leading to. It's leading to an enormous number of animals where only a very small fraction can be rescued. Where in the past, we've just added up 2 years, because otherwise the slide would become very jumpy. But if you would just look at the early days, like say 2000, 2001, it would be hundreds of animals, and us taking in tens of animals. And nowadays, it's 10,000s of animals and still rescuing 50, 60, 100 animals and then reaching our capacity. This means that rescuing those animals alone will not bring the solution. And that's why we're here today, because we really have to put an end to this, because this graph will go on and on. It will grow. The numbers will grow and grow. And building new rescue centers is not the solution for this problem. Furthermore, by rescuing those animals, we can try to make the lives of those animals a little bit better, but still the suffering they went through and the killing that has been gone ahead of the rescue is really something we have to keep in mind. This really asks for a proactive approach. We shouldn't wait for those animals to end up in private households. We should prevent them from being there. Can I have the next slide, please? Just some examples. I don't know if you know who this hero is, but this is a Gambian hamster rat. They are being used to detect mines in war zones, and they are very smart and intelligent animals, but they're also highly social animals. If you try to keep them as a pet, you can put them on a leash and you can walk them in the park, but they will never become a pet. So this small guy became quite aggressive, and if you then have a rat on your shoulder of 2.5 kilos that suddenly attacks you, then it might be your best friend in finding mines, but he can also be quite unpleasant if he bites your ear off. Can I have the next slide, please? One of the big challenges that we are encountering at the moment is the wide range of small cats that are being bought by all kinds of individuals. And this is an offer. The offer of these animals will bring customers so far that they buy these small kittens because they're being sold as kittens, but eventually the serval cat will become a fierceful cat. This one attacked its owner in a very nasty way, the child of the owner in a very nasty way, and eventually was brought to our rescue center. Why should we wait until this happens? Let's try to prevent this in the first place. Can I have the next slide? Hard to see what happens here, but this was a private household in the Netherlands where a private keeper thought it would be nice to keep some degus, a small rodent species that lives in South America on very barren surface, eating as a herbivoric animal. If you put them in a small cage, they start to multiply. And it's not, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to find out that eventually the couple of degus will explode. And these people had, I think, 115 degus in their household. It was difficult to count them because these herbivoric animals had turned to become cannibalistic. They had eaten each other. Limbs and parts of the animals were lying around in the aquaria where they were kept. So many of those animals we couldn't save, and they had to be euthanized because there were only parts of them left. Why should we wait until this happens? Can I have the next slide, please? This is an example. I'm just showing you the X-ray because the whole animal we've already seen. This is a serval cat. There are two of them being kept in Paris in a household where the owner found them a little bit to be aggressive and locked them in the bathroom to the pipes of the water system. But the feeding of these animals was not really sufficient. And you can see here the bones. These bones should be straight. But if you have a young serval cat, this was when the cat was about 1 year old, and it's already looking like this. I mean, this is the worst form of rachitis that you could encounter. I mean, you would be, as a human being, you would be probably asking for euthanasia if this happens to you. But these animals keep living in these households until they die and from pain and agony. Why should we wait until this happens? Can I have the next slide, please? This is a small video that we made for you just to show how a private person comes across those animals and the kind of advice he or she gets before he takes the animal in. Can you start the video, please? This is always a scary moment. No, videos in the presentations are always the moment where things can go wrong. And oh. Is there also sound with it, or is that difficult?
Hier nu in Zaandam. En we gaan even op bezoek bij mensen die via Marktplaats een diertje gekocht hebben. Een wasbeerhond. Maar ja, wasbeerhonden zijn geen huisdieren. Dus de wasbeerhond werd een bijtertje. En nu moet hij naar Stichting Aap. Ik ben heel benieuwd hoe ze met dat dier omgaan. Oh. Dag, ja. Hoe lang hebben jullie beer nou al?
Ik ruim een jaar.
En hoe kwam je nou op het idee om een wasbeerhond te gaan kopen? Ja, dat is nog niet het meest alledaagse huisdier, hè?
Nee, ja, je wil iets apart soms. Ik bedoel, je ziet zo'n klein beetje.
Nou het gevoel van, dit wordt minder leuk.
Ja, sinds een paar maanden eigenlijk. Ik denk dat hij volwassen wordt. En dat hij zegt van, dit is mijn terrein en alles wat ik niet accepteer op dat moment. Begrijp ik je. De dochter van Yvonne heb je al een keer gebeten, maar heb je al meerdere malen gebeten. Dan gaat hij de bezem afvallen.
Toen werd het in één keer duidelijk van, dit gaat niet.
Dat kan gewoon niet. Maar ja, hou op. Nee. Van de week geweest. Deze week. Dat is van eergisteren en dat is van vorige week.
Maar het loopt dus al gewoon uit de hand uiteindelijk.
Ja. En dat is ook de reden dat jullie hier zijn.
So here you see a person who's really fond of animals. It's not like he wants to torture animals. He's fond of animals. He saw an animal online. The pet store owner told him that he could raise the animal just as a dog without telling him that raccoon dogs are non-social animals. Using the mechanisms that work with a social animal like a dog will definitely not work. But also, they're not domesticated. They cannot be trained the same way as a dog can be trained. So that's how these animals end up in private households. Now, since last week, we know that probably the raccoon dogs were responsible for the spreading of COVID-19. I mean, I'm not saying that this private owner has spread COVID-19 over the rest of the world, but it could be that the Chinese are not responsible for it, but it could be that a private owner like him has been responsible for such a thing. I think we shouldn't wait for things like this to happen. Why do we wait until trouble comes upon these animals and the people buying them? Can I have the next slide, please? So, what's next? Well, first of all, I'm a happy person because after 31 years of struggle, finally the Netherlands will implement the positive list January 2024. So the law was there in 1991 and the positive list is there in 2024. It has taken a while, but it did happen eventually. And it is not because the Dutch government was lazy, but because there was so many opposition to the legislation that we proposed. In order to prevent this from happening, we are now, with the help of the National Postcode Lottery, we are developing systematics. It's not under instruction, like it says here, it's under construction. So we are developing a methodology that will help member states by setting up a positive list once the legal requirements have been set. Because if every country by itself should go through the same misery as we did in the Netherlands, we are not using our time in an efficient way. And finally, there are several countries in Europe that already do have a positive list in the legislation, and we're going to help them to find the best way to implement this positive list. So that's the next step. Can I have the last slide, please? And here you can see the status of affairs in Europe. We had to adjust this slide rapidly because just last week, the Spanish government decided, or the Spanish parliament decided to adopt a new animal welfare law with a positive list included. So where Spain was in this map yellow in last week, we had to color it green since exactly a week ago. And we're very proud of that success because our Spanish team has worked on this quite hard. And it eventually led to the success that we can now celebrate. This animal welfare law also has some problems still. I mean, not everything has been solved in there, but at least some issues have been solved. As you can see here, there are still quite some countries that do not have a positive list yet and that do not have a legislation yet. Suppose that we would have to cover all these countries. There are 16 left in the EU that do not have a positive list. Suppose that it would take 31 years in all of those countries to work on a positive list. That would bring us to about 450 years of work until that happens. Let's please not go that route. Let's make sure that the EU covers this problem once and for all, not only for one member state, but for all member states together. And I've worked on this issue for 31 years now. I'm 61 now, so I will not be able to cover more than one other country in my lifetime. So I hope that we will see realism here and that we can see that this is something where the EU has to take its responsibility instead of individual member states. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the next speaker.
Okay, thank you so much, David. That's really inspiring, absolutely fantastic, and with real experiences from what's actually happening within these rescue centres. So before we move on to the next section, we're going to have two more main sections of this event. First of all, we are going to launch this beautiful white paper that we are very, very proud of. And so I'm going to be introducing this first next, and then we'll speak to Davide Rigioni and Alessandra Frattini after that, who have had fundamental parts to play within this. And after that, we're going to introduce our fantastic panel, one of which is online, but I'll go into the full introductions in the second section. So if we could have the next slide, please. Oh, well, this is me. I have to remember my own name now. It says Nicholas Clark there, but I prefer Nick. I always feel like I'm in trouble when I'm being called Nicholas. But when you have a look at this picture here, and think to yourselves, what kind of words come to your mind when you see this animal? And to me, the main words are freedom, choice. This animal has a choice to implement its wild instincts, you know? Now, this is a bearded dragon. It's a solitary animal. It should not be placed with other members of its species. Next slide. But what about these bearded dragons here? These are found in a live animal pet market in the Netherlands, thanks to our member World Animal Protection. And they do not have the choice or the freedom to behave in their natural way, to implement their natural instincts. Next slide, please. The ball python. Naturally, it needs to extend its whole body length. Next slide. But how about this ball python? How long is it spending inside this tiny container? Again, in a pet market, it has to travel there, likely in this container, and we don't know the home that it's going to, and we don't know if the people that it's going to well equipped enough to actually allow this animal to fulfill its natural instincts. Next slide, please. Beautiful tree porcupine. Expert climbers, when they need to, when they want to, they have the freedom to climb a tree to escape. Next slide. Not this tree porcupine. And what happens when we have wild animals in the home that are allowed to use their natural instincts? Next slide, please. Well, we can have severe problems for our beloved companion animals, but also ourselves as well. This is a real problem. Next slide, please. So I promise you that you will be shocked by the variety of the number of species that we can actually keep legally in the EU. As David said, every country is different. And I have a confession to make. The map that's in this book is already out of date, just like David said. So things are changing very quickly for the better. I'm also going to introduce, and this white paper introduces, a system that not only adds value to the negative parts that come from the pet trade within the EU, but also adds value, if we can click, it also adds value to the existing legal framework, because it helps us to better implement and enforce the existing legal framework. And we're going to demonstrate a legally feasible option for a positive list later. Next slide, please. So we're talking about the vast variety of animals that we see. Next slide. And all of the animals that you can see here were actually found in a very short investigation that Davide will mention later on. Online, these animals are available to be bought and kept as pets in the EU. And we often think about status symbols, you know, very often on social media, you have people that pose with powerful animals because maybe it makes them feel powerful. Or people pose with exotic creatures because it might help them feel exotic. And we have a cuteness factor. I mean, I'm guilty of this too. I go through social media, I see a beautiful animal, and my first thought is like, oh, that's just lovely. And then I have to really take a step back and think, hang on, wouldn't this be far more lovely in its natural habitat, in its natural environment? I mean, my friend owned a sugar glider, and he used to talk to me about how much the sugar glider loved him because it would jump from the cage and fly down and land on his arm. But he also forgot about the 98% of the time that this poor animal spent in a cage by itself, especially when my friend was at work. And even I was a teacher for several years, 10 years actually, I'm not giving away my age. But I used to inspire my students, I used to show them pictures of wild animals, of course, because I was a biology teacher. And now upon reflection, I look back at my days as a teacher and I think, wow, if we were looking at wild animals being kept as pets at home, what lesson was I really teaching these students? I was teaching them a lesson of human domination over nature. But what this positive list really demonstrates is a way forward to change from a system of domination over nature to one more aligned with stewardship and respect for nature. And that's extremely important. Next slide, please. And the next one as well. Now, this is an image of a sugar glider. And unfortunately, sugar gliders are often kept alone, but they are social creatures. And they get so bored that they will eventually end up self-mutilating. This is just one of myriad examples of welfare harms that we demonstrate in this white paper, of all kinds of different species that are not suitable to be kept as pets in the home. Next slide, please. In the white paper, you'll find the health and safety issues with keeping wild animals in the home. As we heard from David, we have new evidence that actually COVID-19 likely came from a raccoon dog. Well, we saw people keeping raccoon dogs in the home. Now they're on the invasive alien species list, but still there's plenty of other wildlife that still can pose potential health and safety dangers. Next slide. The guidance from the Convention on Biological Diversity demonstrates the pet trade as a significant invasive alien species pathway. We heard from Pascal earlier that the monk parakeet is a great example of that. This is a monk parakeet. I saw a pandemonium of parakeets. That's the brilliant word for a group of parrots. Outside my house just a couple of days ago. And I think to myself, wow, these are beautiful animals, but why are they here? Next slide, please. And conservation issues. I was lucky enough to be in Panama at CITES. This is the alligator snapping turtle, wonderful animal, but one of the 48 animals that was actually increased their protection status as a direct result of the pet trade. You know, this demonstrates just how important this is. And I'm sorry, but 249 species isn't enough. We have thousands of species that are currently in the pet trade. Next slide, please. So this white paper, I'm going to have to hold and juggle a few different things here now. This white paper represents a signpost, a roadmap, if you will, for many different papers that have been produced in the past by Eurogroup for Animals app and our members, and ones that have been developed for this white paper, and also our proposals for the future. Next slide, next clip. So you can see they're actually over there if you want to see them afterwards. I can't even hold them all here because there's so many. Many of these are novel papers that have been developed just for this white paper. So there's a lot of information here. I really encourage people to read it. Next slide. I will move on to the next slide because I want to save some time. So we also go into the idea of internal market distortions, which is very important. As we saw from David's map, and we're going to see from my map in a second, there are huge differences in the legislation in different member states. Now, what this paper does is it shows you evidence of the initial problem. We have a single market, but we have different laws for certain goods within different countries. How can that be in a single market? This causes disruption in the single market, and harmonized law is the way to reduce that disruption. Next slide, please. So here, this is a slightly different map to the one David showed because David is more up to date than mine. Of course, we have the amazing news that Spain have adopted the positive list. So the next stage is to develop it now, how to do that. But we have this mosaic of national laws, which actually affects the different imports that different countries can have. And so we really need a harmonization of the market, and that can be based on a positive list based on animal welfare. We'll go into details about that later. Next slide. I promised you that we would show you a system that can actually add value to the current legal framework. Well, here we have a representation of the different laws at EU level that touch upon animals that might be kept in the home. And currently, let's take the animal health law, an extremely well-written law, comprehensive. But if you have a huge variety of different species that are traded, if you have a huge number of species, different countries have different laws, it's extremely difficult to understand if a commercial movement has actually happened or not. It's very hard to actually keep up with this trade. And the current legal framework, while written in a way that it could do this, in order to implement it, it is next to impossible. So what a positive list does is it reduces the number of animals that are in the pet trade and simply makes all of these well-written laws more implementable and more enforceable. Next slide, please. Now, we heard about the feasibility study that's coming up. Really, it's a study on the added value and feasibility of an EU-wide positive list. Now here, because of the way that a positive list can work, if we have several different things about to come up, so if we could click them. A positive list has added value for enforcement because a simplified measure is obviously going to be easier to know what's legal and what is illegal, and therefore easier to enforce. We have health, invasive alien species, and conservation. Well, of course, a lower number of species traded is going to have massive added value for all of these areas. The online trade, where we have illegal adverts, as Davida will show you later. So many adverts. You can get a marmoset from Poland where it's legal to have it, but you can get it shipped to Italy where it's illegal to have it. I mean, this is just the argument for subsidiarity right there. You know, you cannot have member states doing this by themselves. So what's missing is animal welfare legislation with regard to animals kept as pets. And what can fill that gap is the positive list. Next slide, please. I won't go into detail here because it's been said by our co-hosts really well, but we have an action plan against wildlife trafficking. I really thank the Commission for being here to listen to our message, so thank you so much. And thank you so much for including the positive list in the action plan against wildlife trafficking. It was a real sense that civil society was being listened to in the stakeholder consultations, and I must stress that that is a fantastic thing. But here, the Council and the Parliament have asked for the assessment of this positive list to go beyond just species taken from the wild, to include captive bred animals as well. All of the problems that I mentioned before, they're also there for animals that are bred in captivity, not just those that are taken from the wild. Next slide, please. So 3 calls from today as a whole, okay? With this feasibility study, we really hope that it goes beyond the current scope, as I mentioned. We're going to demonstrate a legal basis that is a feasible way forward to go at EU level. And we really hope that any analysis and any study really incorporates that model as well, because we really feel that it will be a feasible way with significant added value. And finally, we heard in the introductory remarks about the new animal welfare legislation. Now, this is really important. This is the chance. Wild animals have never had their welfare looked after, but these are going to be, we're talking about wild animals that people are keeping at home. They're selling them, they're trading them, they're gifting them. They are being kept at home. So why are we not including this in upcoming animal welfare legislation? It just does not make sense. And there is a way forward, and we can show you how through this white paper. So that is enough from me. I'm going to pass on to Davida first, and then on to Alessandra. So please, Davida, I'm going to let you introduce yourself because you'll do it so much better than me.
Okay, so good morning, everyone, and thanks for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here in this important event. So my name is Davide Rigoni. I'm the founder of and managing director of Sapiens. And the reason I'm here today is to report on the research we conducted for Eurogroup for Animals and app on the situation of the exotic pets in the European Union. Can you click the next slide, please? Again. Yeah. So the research we conducted was not designed to provide a full and complete overview of the European situation, but rather to provide early insights, so to speak, and as a likely snapshot of the current situation regarding exotic animals in the European Union. So we mainly had three main research questions. We wanted to be able to estimate how many exotic pets there are in the European Union, what is their level of welfare, and where is more research needed in this topic. Can you go to the next slide, please? So to address these research questions, we combined very different research methodologies. We conducted desk research. We conducted interviews with different stakeholders, including veterinarians working and specialized with exotic pets or exotic animals in general. But we also used more innovative research approaches to penetrate markets that are much more difficult to penetrate. And I'm talking about the online trade. So what we did was we created essentially a mystery online profile where I became another person, essentially, from different nationalities. And we access these dedicated platforms where you can buy and sell exotic animals and pretended to be interested in buying those animals. And we will see what this part of the research delivered in terms of new information. Can you go to the next slides, please? And click twice, or yeah, perfect. So to answer one of the first research questions, so how many exotic pets are there in the European Union? We have to say that there were not a lot of available data in the selected countries. However, we did find some partial data from France and Italy. Overall, when we looked at the official reports from the border posts that are designated to inspect for the imports of live animals, we did find that the order of magnitude of the presence and of exotic animals in the European Union is in the order of millions rather than thousands. So just to give an example, in Italy, between 2019 and 2021, 1 million reptiles, 2.5 million ornamental fish, and more than 50,000 exotic mammals were imported into the country. It should also be noted that this is likely to be a gross underestimation of the actual presence of these animals, as these numbers only refer to the imports into the country or into the European Union, but they do not account for, or they do not reflect, the intra-European Union trade. As we will see later, there is reasons to believe, and there is evidence that a big portion of the intra-EU trade goes basically untraced and not unnotified. The next slides, please. So we were also looking for another, let's say, indirect parameter of the magnitude of the presence of exotic pets in the European Union. And we asked, basically, we thought to ask to the veterinarians working with exotic pets about the number of visits they will do per year with these animals. And the numbers show that, again, the very consistent figures. Just to give an example, a specialized clinic, so a veterinary clinic that is specialized in treating and providing health services to exotic animals, conducts up to more than 12,000 visits per year to these kind of animals. While a veterinary doctor working independently can conduct up to 1,500 visits per year with these animals. And these data were consistent for the three countries we selected, so Ireland, France, and Italy. Of course, to have a full view of the scale of the phenomenon, we should also know how many veterinary doctors work actually or are specialized with these animals. And again, we had some data from Italy where we know that there are at least a bit more than 800 veterinary doctors specialized in exotic pets. So it's relatively easy to make some calculations, again, taking into consideration that these are likely to be a gross underestimation. because it's based on an indirect index, and it's based on the fact that it doesn't include the visits to veterinary doctors that are not specialized in exotic pets, which were not included in this research. The next slide, please. It is also interesting to note that the number of specialists, so veterinarians that are specialized in exotic pets, seems to be increasing, or actually there is evidence that it is increasing. Compared to 2008, in 2016, there was an increase of 400% in the number of veterinarians choosing to specialize in the treatment of exotic animals. Next slide, please. When interviewing the veterinarians, we also had information not only on the size of the phenomenon, but also on the quality of or the perceived quality of the husbandry. So we asked veterinarians, how do you see, what is your perception of the quality of the husbandry of the owners of exotic pets? And we had three main findings. Can you click 3 times? We had 3 main findings. First of all, the quality of the husbandry is perceived as very inconsistent, meaning that there are indeed some pet owners that are extremely skilled and extremely knowledgeable about the animals, but there is also a big portion of pet owners who have literally no idea of what they're doing. And this leads, of course, to bad quality of the husbandry, which is, according to the veterinarians, linked to most of the pathologies that are observed in their practice. So up to 90% of the symptoms or the pathologies that are shown by the animals that are treated by the veterinarians are linked to basically bad animal management. The interviews also revealed that actually normally most of the times, and that's a bit confirmed by what was said before, it's not a bad intention. It's not that the pet owners are bad people or that they are cruel. It's just that they have very poor to no knowledge of how to treat these animals, especially with more complex animals, some species of reptiles. They look cute, they look very fascinating, but they're very difficult to treat. And many pet owners do not have the skills or the knowledge to provide appropriate management. Next slide, please. Yeah, in terms of the quality, the animal welfare was also, we had information about the animal welfare of the exotic pets also from the research on the online trade, which overall shows very low level of concern by the sellers. Can you go to the next slide? So for instance, when we were trying to negotiate and trying to buy some animals, we realized, it was revealed by the interviews that the sellers were really not providing appropriate guidelines on how to transport or keep these animals. For instance, we were told that when I was trying to buy a Corsac fox, that the animal was very tough and that could be transported for 24 hours with no problem. Or to take a plastic box for a cat if I wanted to transport a big bird from Germany to Belgium. Next slide, please. And this was also true for other basic needs of the animal, like nutrition, sleeping, social needs, and so on. So the guidelines were extremely vague and generic and not species specific. You go to the next slide. So in addition to a low level of concern shown by the sellers, we also had, the research in the online trade showed that there is an easy access to illegal trade, and that the trade can be very easily untracked. So it can happen without no notification whatsoever to the competent authorities. Next slide, to provide some more details about this. We tried to buy animals with an identity from Belgium and Italy, where there was already some positive list adopted. And we tried to buy animals that were banned in the country of the buyers, so in Belgium and Italy. And that was never actually a problem. Out of the 18 interviews, we could buy 17 out of the 18 interviews. They could lead to the purchase of very strange animals, like or very very wild animals, like bear cats, Corsac foxes, a golden eagle, porcupines, and caracal cats, and so on. So I have a long list. And none of the sellers actually mentioned the necessity to notify the competent authorities. So suggesting that actually a big portion, or at least one portion of the trade goes untracked. Next slide, please, to conclude. So there are three main conclusions that we can from this research. First of all, when we talk about the size, it is difficult to have an accurate estimate, but we are relatively confident and quite confident that we are talking about millions of exotic pets in the European Union. And this is, for the reason I said before, is a gross underestimation. The quality of the husbandry is inconsistent, and it's linked to the clearly linked to the animal health, so to animal welfare. And it's perceived to be quite low in the online trade. And in terms of knowledge gaps, there are a lack of or scarcity of official data concerning the movements, both intra and extra EU. And there is basically a blind spot in terms of one ownership of how many people are keeping exotic animals and their level of welfare. Thanks a lot for listening, and yeah, see you later.
Fantastic, Davide. Thank you so much. Really amazing insights. And so now we have an idea of the kind of research that was done. I've introduced the white paper, and I told you that there is a feasible way forward. So I'm going to introduce Alessandra Frattini. She's founding partner of Frattini Vergano, European Lawyers. And I pass the floor straight to you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for having me here. And thank you, everybody, for being ready to listen to this specific presentation. My team and I were asked by Eurogroup for Animals to examine whether and how the EU could adopt a positive list. That is to say, a measure whereby only species that are listed in the list could be traded in the EU. So I'll try now to present the results of this assessment in a very succinct way. Next slide, please. I will do so by looking first at the content and the aims that a measure establishing a positive list is intended to attain. Then look at the, go back to the summary, please, to the potentially feasible legal basis. That means the potentially relevant provisions of the treaty that are relevant, as I said, for the attainment of those aims. I will look at compatibility with the principles of subsidiarity and proportionality, the legal instrument that could be adopted, and then I will briefly touch upon the issue of compliance with WTO. As I said, I'll start with content and aims of the measures. Next slide, please. And I will do so because under the principle of conferral, under the Article 5 of the treaty, the EU can only act within the limits of the competences that have been conferred to it by the member states. So there has to be at least one provision in the treaty that allows the EU to act in that specific field. And the Court of Justice recalled that the choice of the legal basis is to be determined in light of objective factors, and in particular, the aim and the content of a measure. Next slide, please. So the measure we're talking about would have as a content the establishment of a positive list, allowing the trade of the listed companion animals within the EU. And in this context, trade, the term trade would mean, and consistently with the definition that is used in the basic regulation, Council regulation, the introduction into the Union and the export and re-export therefrom, as well as the use, movement, and transfer of possession within the EU, including within a member state, of companion animals, subject to the provision, of course, of the measure establishing the EU positive list. And the term companion animals, and here again, consistently with the definition that we have in the animal health law, would mean animals that are traded for the purpose of human companionship and or leisure, or for being kept in a household. As to the aims, next slide, please. The measure would aim at protecting animal welfare in the first place, but most predominantly, it would aim at improving the conditions for the establishment and functioning of the internal market for companion animals, and in particular, by addressing the fragmentation that results from the different national provisions. We have heard from the presentation earlier on that we have a mosaic of provision across the EU. Next slide, please. So these being the objectives, the potentially feasible legal basis, that is to say, the relevant treaty provisions are, next slide, please, Article 113 and Article 114 of the treaty. The first one refers to animal welfare. Well, that one is not really a legal basis suitable for establishing an EU positive list, because basically Article 13 is more of an horizontal principle that applies across the board when the EU adopts measures in the policy fields that are listed therein. Nevertheless, animal welfare requirements are to be fully taken into account in formulating the measure, while Article 114, concerning internal market, according to established case law, can be relied upon as a legal basis if three conditions are met. First, there must be an internal market barrier resulting from disparities in the laws, administrative provisions, or regulations of the member states, and we know that that is the case. Second, that internal market barrier creates obstacles to cross-border trade, which is by definition, of course. And third, the measure, the intended measure, must remove the obstacle to cross-border trade. So we came to the conclusion these three conditions are met with regard to a measure establishing a positive list. Next slide, please. Then, because the internal market is a competence that is not exclusive to the EU, but is a shared competence with member states, we need to look also at the compliance of the choice of this legal basis with the principle of subsidiarity and proportionality. I look first at the subsidiarity principle laid down in Article 5, paragraph 3 of the Treaty of the EU, that basically requires that the proposed action can, because of its scale and effects, be better achieved at the level of the EU. Now, here it's in the essence of the measure that we are looking at. So a measure that effectively contributes to the functioning of the EU internal market by harmonizing national provisions, by definition, pursues an objective that cannot be adequately pursued by member states alone. So a measure that establishes a positive list under Article 114 of the treaty would comply with the subsidiarity principle. Moving then to the proportionality principle, next slide, please, which is paragraph 4 of the same Article 5 of the treaty. The principle requires that a measure is appropriate for attaining its legitimate objective, does not go beyond what is necessary to achieve those objectives, and does not cause disadvantages which are disproportionate to the objective pursued. This last one is the so-called proportionality stricto sensu test. Now, if we look at these three conditions in connection with the positive list, next slide, please, we can see that a measure establishing such a positive list would be first suitable, because it would apply across the EU and therefore would remove the existing divergences at national level. It would be necessary because a less far-reaching measure, not only, for example, the establishment of rescue centers, as we heard earlier from David, but also the establishment of a negative list, would not have an equal preventive effect. And on top of it, it would also become outdated fast because of the developments in the supply of new animal species on the market. And third, when it comes to the proportionality stricto sensu test, if we think of the disadvantages in terms of, for example, effects on the freedom to pursue an economic activity of economic operators that are already in the market, as the positive list would not be a blanket ban, well, it would not constitute a disproportionate impairment on the rights to exercise an economic activities or of the right to property in that respect. And it's worth mentioning at this stage that the Court of Justice, in a case concerning a positive list for vitamins and minerals, had the opportunity to confirm that a positive list would not be manifestly disproportionate if it provided for an application procedure designed to allow a given, for what matters here, animal species to be added to or removed from that list. So a sort of flexibility that would allow, in case of development of science, for example, or other assessment, to adjust that list. And also, in the respect, the existence of certification schemes for keepers and breeders would allow to pass the proportionality stricto sensu test. Next slide, please. Now, if you look at what legal instrument would be appropriate for such a measure, next slide, please. It seems that a regulation would ensure a uniform identification of companion animals that could be traded within the EU, and in that respect enable a consistent and effective applications of the rules. So a regulation appears to be necessary to provide legal certainty and transparency for both economic operators and consumers, and also it will be consistent with the existing policy framework in the field of animal welfare that is mostly composed of regulations. And then a final note on WTO compliance issues. Next slide, please. It's clear that a fully fledged analysis or scrutiny under WTO can only be carried out once you have an actual measure on the table, so what is actually in the measure. However, based on the scope and the objectives of the measures, which in turn identify the WTO agreements against which the compliance assessment has to be carried out, while a positive list based on the objectives that we have assessed could be developed in compliance with WTO rules. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. Can we have a round of applause for the... So I think we've seen quite comprehensively a list of the problems with the pet trade, what's happening with the scale of the pet trade, the insights of vets, the insights of the online trade, and then a real feasible way forward, which is proportional, adheres to the principles of subsidiarity, and really is a decent way forward. And we believe that that's the way we should go. We also heard the idea that it's not a blanket ban. And I think that is really, really important for everybody to understand, because a positive list can be misunderstood and misconstrued. But really, it's quite a sensible, practical approach. Now we're going to move on to the second section of today's speeches. And this is a panel, and I'm going to introduce Reineke Hameliers, the CEO of Eurogroup for Animals. So I'm sitting next to my boss, so please say nice things and smile. So please, Reineke, the floor is yours, and to introduce this really fantastic panel.
Thanks so much, Nick. And firstly, thank you, Manuela, for hosting this important event today. We are now going to hear from several experts from countries who have already implemented or are in the process of introducing positive lists. And really hear from them why have they introduced a positive list, what were the challenges, how did they overcome them, and how do they think that their experiences can really inform the feasibility study the Commission will be undertaking. I hope you're not too hungry yet. I see there are some sandwiches, but please bear with us. We will try to really finish around 1, but not without having listened to our experts. Once we have done some introductions, I'm opening the floor. So I would really like you all to ask your questions. So we have a very animated debate about this. So on my right, I would like to introduce Laure de Comer, Animal Welfare Policy at the Flemish government, at the Department of Animal Welfare. And then Marina Michaelidou, Senior Officer of the Cyprus Agriculture, Natural Resources and Environment Ministry. And then Berit Marieres, who is online. I hope you can hear us well, Berit. She's veterinary inspector at the Luxembourg Veterinary and Food Administration. And then Sabine van Mesten, Animal Welfare Senior Policy Officer at the Dutch Ministry of Agriculture, Nature and Food Quality. So warm welcome to all of you. I would like to ask you all to introduce yourself and really explain to us why did your country decide to introduce a positive list and move away from the negative list approach. And if applicable, because some of you are still in the process of introducing a positive list, how did you evaluate its success? And of course, we are also very curious to hear this from Belgium, because this is the positive list that has been in place the longest. We should also note that at the moment, 7 member states have introduced or will introduce a positive list, and that Finland and probably also Portugal are seriously considering this. So we see a lot of traction already. So firstly, inviting you, Laura, to come in and to share about what is happening in Belgium.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Laura. I work for the Flemish Government Department of Animal Welfare. And I would first like to highlight actually our positive list history. So the thought process around the positive list actually started for us in the 90s. So that's actually quite a while ago for me. Our first royal degree was created in 2001 and was later also annulled after a process at the Council of State. Because there were complaints from private owners, from associations, hobbyists. But in 2009, a new royal decree was created, fixing a list of 42 mammal species that everyone could keep. And our list was actually created with the precautionary principle in mind. So you can keep an animal unless you can, it's compatible with its welfare. So measuring the success of a positive list is quite hard because it mostly aims at a change of mentality. So you can actually measure that after years. So that's really difficult. A direct consequence we saw was that prohibited animals disappeared from pet shops. And most importantly, people didn't consider it normal anymore to keep exotic pets, to trade exotic pets. So it's actually that change in mentality that's really important for us. We've also seen that after the implementation of the positive list, there was an enormous social control. So a lot of people actively reported illegal advertisements or the illegal housing of exotic animals, which for us is kind of a proof of the successful operation of a positive list.
Thank you so much, Laura, and it's great to hear that. Since you introduced the positive list.
Yes, that's definitely true. So yeah, we do get some feedback from animal shelters, but also from wildlife sanctuaries in Flanders. And they see a decrease in their influx of exotic animals coming from private ownerships. And it's also true that only a small percentage of our inspection files concern the discovery of exotic animals in private ownership. And that actually proves that change in mentality. People do not longer find it normal that we keep these animals in homes. So, and we want to maintain this change. It's really important.
Thank you so much, Laura. And we will also later on touch upon the next steps of the positive list in Belgium for other species than mammals. Marina, turning to you. Positive list, and you also led the process on introducing a council paper to really promote the idea of an EU-wide positive list. So Cyprus has been at the basis also of this white paper today and the feasibility study that will come about. Why is this so important for Cyprus?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you also for inviting me here. I'm very happy to be with you to share our experience with a positive list in Cyprus. I should start by saying that during the last few years or so, our ministry has focused on implementing an integrated framework consisting of various measures and policies for enhancing the welfare of animals that live in Cyprus. One of these measures was a new regulation that tried to regulate the operations of pet shops and initially focused on introducing specific requirements for the living and welfare conditions of animals in pet shops and banned the sale of animals from any individual that did not own a license for operating a pet shop. During the initial discussions for these regulations, an opportunity presented itself to include within the regulations a positive list of animals that could be sold and could be owned as pets in Cyprus. So after 5 or 6 years of deliberations, the positive list came into force. We're very happy that we managed to pass this regulation through Parliament, and we believe it has been very successful in regulating the import of wild animals and particularly terminating the import of wild mammals in Cyprus.
Thank you so much, Marina. And do you also recognize what Laura just said, that it has led also to a mentality change?
I think, yes, we see a mentality change in general. I think people and the society push for welfare, for animal welfare, and people are at a stage now where they understand that keeping a wild animal in a cage, in a confined space, cannot be justified. So yes, definitely we see a change in mentality, and that's very helpful.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. We will come back to you later on with some more specific questions. Turning to our online panelist, I can't see you yet, but Berit, are you with us, and are you happy to explain to us why Luxembourg decided to introduce a positive list and how that is working?
Yes, I hope you hear me.
Yes, we can hear you, and now we can see you too.
Okay. First of all, yes, I'm sorry that I cannot be there in person, but I hope for other occasions it will be the case then. Yes, in Luxembourg, the former protection law for animals dated from 1983, and then when it was decided to make a new law, because in the former law certain species were forbidden, but they were present in Luxembourg, and we didn't know really what was in Luxembourg and what was circulating. So it was decided to put on the way a positive law with the aim to have the possibility to take a certain control or to regularize the species of animals kept, and so to be able to provide and guarantee a better welfare. So to have a legal base to regularize, stop, analyze, and confiscate if necessary, if the keeping of the animals is not conform.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Berit. Now your positive list is still relatively young. How do you evaluate its success till now? Do you have greater insight? Because we know that, you know, the data, as already showcased before, is really lacking. Do you have better insight in the trade itself? And do you see that the trade has really gone down?
I think we have a better picture of it, but it's really for reptiles and all of this, there is a great operation in secret, I would say. Even if there is a law, they try, I will not say all, but often they try to not be too conform, or they say it's too complicated or something like this. So we have more relations with them, but it's difficult, I must say.
Okay, and is the positive list, sorry, please? Go on.
At the end, I think for me it's easier because when I have requests now for monkeys, for servals, for savannas, F1 to F4 generations, for all of these animals, I can say at the beginning, no, we don't accept this for the reasons that are, yes, for the animal welfare, protection of the species, and for reasons like this. So we can prevent it at the beginning now, which was not the case before.
Yes, very good. So it's also it's a preventative tool, but it also helps you to better enforce the legislation. Thanks so much, Berit, for now. Welcome, Sabine. Now, the Netherlands has not yet introduced a positive list. It has taken a long time. We won't go into that. In the Netherlands, sometimes things take longer. You know, in Belgium, you know, it just happens. But in the Netherlands, you know, we do things thoroughly. What is going to happen?
Well, I'm also curious, of course, but what's happening right now is that we're really focusing on implementing the list. We have published the list last year. It took a very long time to get a good list, also because there also is a strong need for a legal foundation, a really good legal foundation. And it took some time, and really the focus with this list is on being transparent, objective, and making sure that everything has a scientific foundation also. So we first had a committee who made an assessment framework to assess all the mammal species, and then a second advisory board, also with scientists who has assessed all 300 mammal species, and really looked at the animal and the animal's characteristics. Wow, that's a difficult word. The animal as it is, yes. And not really the way we can cope with those. So, and the result is a list of 30 animals, which will be allowed to keep from the 1st of January. So we're really focusing on getting that into force and communicating to owners of pets right now that are not on the list to make sure that they won't get rid of their animal, but know that they are allowed to keep them until the animal dies. So that's our focus right now.
Yes, great. Thank you, Sabine. And why was it important for the Netherlands to introduce a positive list? Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yes. First of all, it's in our Animals Act, so we're really obligated to make a list. And I think for the last 30 years, there already was a lot of support for a list, because we saw that there are a lot of animals that are kept that are really not suitable, no matter what sort of extra rules you would make, to which owners should comply. You see that there's just too much going wrong when certain animals are kept. So it's really a basic need to ensure that only animals are kept that are really suitable. So.
Great. Well, we look forward to the introduction and to the enforcement. So we are going to open the floor for any questions from your side. Who would like to comment first? You know, that's always a difficult moment for a moderator. But I see, you know, a hesitating hand from the opposite side of the table. Please, and I would also like to ask you, introduce yourself and your organization.
Thank you very much, Reineke. Joe Moran from Four Paws. Clearly, from the experience we've just heard about, positive lists add enormous benefit for member states, and we can only imagine the impact that an EU-wide positive list would have as a consequence. But from your experience, what elements would have to be considered as part of an EU-wide positive list? For example, certification for keepers.
Thank you, Joe, also for touching upon that rather sensitive issue. But no, very good question. So if there was to be an EU-wide list, what are your sort of lessons learned, and how should we deal with certain exemptions? Marina, would you like to come in on that?
Sure. Well, I can mention that in Cyprus, before the positive list was enacted, there was a giant loophole. So people could import animals, declare them as pets, and then there was no way of regulating that. But for us, it wasn't, because the discussions were initiated based on a regulation, as I mentioned, for the operations of pet shops. The biggest challenge was managing the interests of different stakeholders and pet shop owners. And we were fortunate in a way that there was not a very strong opposition to that. So we didn't have to consider an exception for certified keepers. That never came up. But of course, our list focuses on mammals. And I think that made it a bit easier to be accepted, because pet shop owners did not object to banning the sale and keeping of wild mammals. And it was very difficult for anyone actually to question that the welfare of wild mammals could not be met in captivity. That was not the case with other taxa. Birds, for example, they're being sold at a large scale in Cyprus across pet shops all over the island. So we weren't able to include other taxa. Decision had to be made, and that was to focus on mammals, following Belgium's example. So for Cyprus, that was not the case. We did not have any exemption. Of course, zoos are under a different legislation.
Thank you so much, Marina. And how is the situation in Belgium, Laura? Could you say a bit about that? How do you deal with certain exemptions?
We have definitely, and we're still facing challenges. One of them is how do we, when people keep a pet illegally and we discover this, what is the right approach to this? That's a very difficult situation, and also something that I think every member state will face when a EU-positive list will be put up. So for now, we handle that case by case, make a decision, but it's really not simple. And I think every member state could use guidelines and recommendations for this. So it would be a great opportunity if Europe would make these, and it would help a lot of member states. Also, a very delicate problem is communication around positive lists, because we do want to increase general knowledge about them. That's very important. But of course, we don't want to unintentionally advertise keeping exotic animals as pets. So that's a really delicate balance, and we try to do it correctly, but it's still difficult.
Thank you, Laura. And how do you deal with certifications? People you still allow to keep species?
Yes, in Belgium or in Flanders, we have a specific system. So we allow people to add species to the list or to keep non-positive list animals, but certain procedures have to be followed. So if you want to house a non-positive animal, list animal, you should fill in application forms who are very detailed, and we gather a lot of information so that a team of exotic animal welfare experts can review them. And in this way, we want to assure that if we allow an exotic animal to be kept as a pet, that it is by a person with the right know-how, and also that this person can give this animal positive welfare experience. So that's a really important part for us.
Thank you so much, Laura, for these very helpful lessons learned. Berit, turning to you, any lessons from Luxembourg?
Yes, in Luxembourg, there's the positive list of animals that can be kept. And then if you want to have non-positive animals, you must have an authorization for the Ministry of Agriculture. So you must make a request at our administration, the Luxembourg Veterinary and Food Administration. And then you have to make a dossier with the biology, the feeding, what the infrastructures, what you have for keeping them. So it's really an overview to see that at least they had to manage with it, to think about it, what it means to keep such animals. And then it's always the same, also that we go on the place to people to see if it's really as it was in the request, so on the demand. And then at the end, the ministry decides to give on our opinion an authorization or not. And there are two possibilities because the law entered into force in 2018. So you can or you must have an authorization for the animals kept before. And that's really individual for for every animal. You can't breed with them, and you can't take other animals. And the other possibility is to, by you now after the entering into force of the law, so you make a demand, and then you must, you can have the possibility of reproduction and to get other animals. It's to prevent that they taken before, you must have proofs that they were kept or taken conform, I would say, with traces and all. You must prove that you had kept them before 2018.
Thank you so much, Berit. And do you receive lots of these requests?
Yes. Because our list is, I think, in certain manner restrictive. So even alpaca or llama is not on it.
Okay.
So you must have an authorization for that. And then for reptiles, it's the same thing. And as I said before, the people in this area for reptiles and all are a little bit more difficult sometimes. But I think that shows that it is really necessary to have an overview of all of it.
Yeah, and to have also very good checks and balances in place. Thanks so much. Berit, we are turning to other questions. Ooh, now I see lots of hands. I know also Manuela would like to ask a question. Let's first take a question from that side of the table, and then I come to you, Manuela, okay? Please.
Elaine Toland, Animal Protection Agency. The Andy Bell judgment of the European Court of Justice upheld the concept of positive lists as long as there was a facility to add or remove species in the light of new evidence. So in other words, the positive list is a flexible tool. Could you explain, Laura, how this has worked in Belgium? And touched on that this would be an important facility of an EU-wide positive list. So what would the general advantages of that be over a negative list?
Very good question. Thank you, Laura. You would like to take that one?
Yes, for sure. As explained, we do have procedures to add species to the list. This can be done by the Flemish government, but also by citizens. And we also have a procedure for housing non-positive list animals. So for the procedure to add a species, it's really important that the applicant proves that the given species can be kept by everyone without damaging its welfare. So they actually need to provide a lot of detailed scientific data on that species in the wild or in captivity, and that proof, that data will be scientifically reviewed, also with our criteria in mind, and that are criteria that are in our regulations. I've already explained a bit about the procedure to house an animal that's not on the positive list. So we have a system with animal welfare experts who review that. And I think if you want such procedures, if you want a Europe positive list, then probably you have to include also these kind of procedures. And that is also something you see with our first list. It goes to court. There's a lot of complaints. So, but after we did the introduction of these procedures, it went well. And I think for the negative list versus positive list, it's kind of it's more about the principle. So the negative list says, okay, you can keep an animal species unless it demonstrates that it's problematic. But for the positive list, like I've said before, we start from the precautionary principle, which is really important for us. So in theory, starting from a negative list or a positive list, you maybe could end up with the same list. But in practice, we see the positive list actually leads to a lot higher level of protection for the animals. So, and I think that is the most important aspect of it. And it's also something that is recognized by the European Court of Justice.
Yes, absolutely. And Laura, how many animals have you listed or delisted since the introduction?
Okay, we started with 42 animals. And we haven't yet delisted animals, or we haven't added animals to the list, because until now there wasn't enough proof that we got in that we said, okay, now we can add one. But maybe in harmonization with the species, the invasive species list, that we need to delist some animals, because there is still some animals that are on our list but are invasive. So yeah, that's something we have to take into account.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good, thank you. Manuela, would you like to come in and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe it was already partly answered, but maybe it's also a question for David that I have, because ahead of this event, I was contacted by breeders and animal lovers that were really concerned that maybe this list will affect them negatively. Because we're talking about a positive list not only for wild animals, but also animals that are bred in captivity. And so is this positive list affecting breeders who have the necessary level of expertise to keep these animals? Would you see that as a problem? And would the positive list be a legal opportunity for the legal import of wild animals for these breeders who were very much concerned that this positive list would affect them negatively?
Thank you, Manuela. Are you happy to take this one? I'm sure you are.
Sure, of course. Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I must say it will affect also breeders that do well, although, as we heard earlier, there are possibilities as for now to get an exemption. So, and I think that that's the beauty of the system of a positive list. So first of all, there's the possibility to add animals to the general list if certain requirements are being met. That's what the Belgian government has now explained in their systematics. And secondly, an individual owner, breeder can have an exemption that will still limit their scope, because the breeding will in most cases not be allowed. And finally, the majority of those breeders would probably be more would fit more the zoo directive environment. So they can always apply for a certification in terms of a zoo. They can get a zoo permit. And that is if they have more than 10 species of wild animals and are open to the public more than 7 days a year, which they usually are. So it will really affect them. I mean, I'm not going to shy away from that. But on the other hand, there are ways for really the ones that do a good job to proceed with the way they're working, or to liaise with the zoo and to get an exemption in that sense. So I hope that also in that respect, this will not hurt the ones that are doing good, because probably there are. But also, I must say that I'm not talking about the individual breeders, but as we've heard before, the mix between legal and illegal trade is very much alive. So what we encounter is many illegally traded animals amongst the legally traded animals. So I would not be unhappy if that trade would be limited to some extent as well.
Yes, thank you so much, David. So it will certainly also affect breeders, but it will also lead to a different kind of breeding practice. I hope that answered your question. Thank you. Other questions? Hey, on opposite of me, Ilaria, please.
Hi everyone, Ilaria Di Silvestre from IFO. IFO works since years on illegal trade on wildlife online, both in terms of spotting illegal trade, illegally traded species, but also in providing training to enforcement authorities. And one of the problems we see is that enforcement is extremely challenging when you have so many species that are traded, and also the trade that we know the exotic pet trade, it's a very dynamic trade that shifts from one species to another very quickly. And identification, especially when we're speaking about amphibians, reptile, could be a real challenge. So one could imagine that with a positive list that provide a clear list of species that are allowed and all the rest will be clearly prohibited, enforcement will be easier. May I ask confirmation of that from those of you that are already experienced in implementation of the positive list? Thank you.
Very good question. So let's ask the panelists who have experience with this. Did it facilitate the lives of your law enforcers? Would you like to come in first, please, Marina?
Oh, that's definitely the case. I mean, the positive list is a very clear list of specific animals that can be traded. Well, I can speak with the Cyprus case. We focused on mammals, as I said. So we made a clear distinction that only domesticated mammals could be sold and kept as pets. We did not differentiate between animals that are born in captivity or wild animals that are born in the wild. And I think that's really important too, because as Nick mentioned before, the welfare of an animal does not, it doesn't matter if the animal was born in captivity in terms of taking care of its welfare. But yeah, in Cyprus, the positive list was, it came together with this regulation that no person can sell or trade an animal if it does not have a licensed pet shop. If he's not a licensed pet shop owner. So that made enforcement especially more practical and more feasible, because online trading of wild animals is now prohibited in Cyprus.
So this was an additional measure that helped you
to
enforce.
It was an additional measure.
Yes. That's very interesting to note. Because we know that the online sales is a big source also of the problems. Turning to Laura, Belgium has a long experience already with the mammal positive list. So what do you hear back from law enforcers?
Yeah, we also definitely see an effect on our enforcement. When we first implemented the list, we did a lot of inspections in pet shops, and we did it simultaneously with an awareness campaign. As we see throughout the years, the amount of inspections or of reports we get has decreased, but that's probably a result of just the decrease in amount of exotic pets we have in Flanders, for example. So again, we had a really big change in mentality. So yeah, we see just less exotic pets being kept. So indeed, that has an effect on the amount of inspections we have to do.
Thank you, Laura. I hope that this sufficiently answered your question. So yes, it is a very important improvement also for law enforcers. I would like to hear more questions. Joe, please.
Thank you. Thank you for all the presentation. I apologize for having missed the first part of the meeting. So maybe what I'm going to ask might have partly come up there. I mean, it's great that some member states are already in the process of adopting and implementing these positive lists. Ideally speaking, we should really be having a positive list at an EU level, given the ease with which species can be transported over borders, and how that we really need to have it as a 27 member state issue. I'm curious from those people that have actually, those member states that have already implemented the positive lists, what kind of challenges and solutions do you think we're likely to face, and the Commission is likely to face if and when this is implemented at an EU level? And, you know, is there stuff that if you could kind of go back and do it all over again, is there anything you would have done differently in order to make your list more watertight?
Thank you for this question. So what would be your recommendation to the European Commission listening today and preparing the feasibility study? And I think this question is also relevant for you, Sabine. So, but I see Laura already grabbing her mic. So you go first.
I'm very enthusiastic.
Yes.
I've already talked about a little bit of the challenges like communication and stuff. What's really important is that a positive list is not just the naming of the fixing a certain amount of animal species. It's way bigger than that. We also need guidelines and recommendations, and I think that's very important that we will get them at a wider level, the bigger level, on a EU level. So and then we also have the challenge of the scientific naming of the animal species being considered for the list, because you don't want to create disputes. For example, if you pick a domesticated pig, do you name it or do you highlight its domestication in the name Sus domesticus, or do you go or do you name it according to the mammal species of the world, Sus scrofa? But what does that mean? Is it only refers to the domesticated pig, but also to the wild boar? So that is a problem that we faced, and we try to handle now. What do we do with scientific naming?
Thank you, Laura. And it would add value if this received a more harmonized approach, a more uniform approach.
Absolutely. I think it's very important that we harmonize.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Laura. Turning to you, Berit, online, what would be your recommendation to the European Commission starting the feasibility study?
I think also that it is really important to think which animals will be on the list. Because when I see for our list in Luxembourg, we have only, I think, about 30 mammals on it. And then for reptiles and fish and parrots and all, it's more waste. So now we are thinking, because when I am on the field, I realize that there is a real problem in Luxembourg for parrots like macros, to put them on the list too. And that's perhaps a thing that we thought now practicing it, and we didn't know before. We could have done it before already. So, and then also for the scientific names, because we have scientific names, and sometimes now there are discussions if that includes this species or this, and so it's really, really important to think about that. And what I would find good is that if there will be an EU list, that for us, like with a restrictive list, that there would be the possibility, even if the animals that we have on the list are not on the EU list, that we can be stricter. So can say now, yes, we can say that this one is not on our positive list, and that you still must have an authorization, for example.
Yes, I think that's a very good point also to include non-regression clauses, but also, as we said, it's a flexible tool. The national context can be different, but we need a harmonized approach in order to make it more effective. So turning to Marina, so what would be your advice to the Commission?
Sure, thank you. Well, I would really love the EU to include other taxa, not only mammals, because as I mentioned before, managing the interests of pet shop owners and breeders was the most difficult challenge in enforcing a positive list. So if it were an EU mandate, that the EU would push for other taxa and scientists came together from different countries, it would be immensely easier for member states to enforce this positive list. So we have to move away from mammals, include other taxa as well, with cooperation, and that would be very helpful.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Marina. And then, Sabine, what could the Commission learn from all your experiences and the intense journey?
Thank you. I think if you look at the Netherlands, the most important thing for us is really transparency, objectivity, expertise, and I would really recommend the European Commission to take that into account. What we also did was after we published the list, also we published all the research that has been done, so that everyone can see why a certain animal is on the list or not on the list. And also when you are looking at the possibility to for citizens to request an animal to be placed on the list or taken off, it's very good if they can see the initial research, and then you have a good discussion about that. So really transparency and being very transparent on how the decision has been made to put an animal on the list or not.
Thank you. And Sabine, do you think that the Dutch methodology would also work at EU level?
Well, we are very happy with it, but yeah, possibly it really focuses on animal welfare on the one hand and human safety on the other. And human safety means the risk on physical injury or zoonotic disease. And I think it's a beautiful method to really in a structural way assess each animal species. And well, that's why we published it online, to be very transparent. So yeah, good, I think.
Thanks a lot for that. I think, Nick, we have time for one more question or no? A really burning question. I see a hand over there, please.
Thanks so much. David Garrihy from World Animal Protection. And actually my question is also on the Dutch list, because I understand it has a short list of mammal species. And I'm wondering, what are the benefits of an approach like this? Do you foresee when it comes into force? Thank you.
Thank you. Just to say, this is first, we didn't really have a certain in mind or a certain number we were going for. Really what we did is we let the minister really got the advice from an external party. And it's just the short list is really a result of the scientific research. So it just shows how difficult it is to keep animals, really taking their animal welfare into account. So I think a benefit is that it's really clear for people which animals are suitable. And I think when it comes to enforcing it, it's also good that it's a short list. But it's also a very big change. So that's really it's all, yeah. So for some people that's very difficult because 30 is really a small number. So it wasn't really a goal on its own. It's really a result of the research. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much, Sabine. And I think, Nick, now it's time to wrap up this session. Thank you so much to the panelists. And if you have a question, you want to ask it later, please don't hesitate. I think we have some great best practices here to inform the feasibility study. And I think a key insight is that, the EU could really also bring value to avoid that we will end up with 27 very different positive lists. That would be interesting, but not really enforceable and not really also solving the problem. So I'm handing back to you for the closing remarks, or anyway. Right.
That's right. We're going to hand over to Manuela for the closing remarks, and then I'll say one or two comments before we have our sandwiches. So
thank you very much to all the panelists for the very important statements that they did today, and to all the participants of this conference. I think we learned a lot today, at least I did, and have a lot of food for thought. One of the arguments that convinced me most of a positive list was the change of mentality in society that we learned about once a member state introduced this positive list. And having a society that's more critical of having wild animals as pets, that does not see it as normal, I think is the best fight to tackle illegal pet trade, which is one of the most difficult fights that we have to do in the Union. So to wrap up, as a conclusion, what we heard today, I think we can say that a key message towards the Commission is a positive list is legally feasible. It has a significant added value across many problem areas, and it will strengthen existing EU legislation. We need to ensure that we don't miss an opportunity, and you have the European Parliament and most of the Council on your side, so please act. Read the white paper, and let's remember three things. Let's include all animals in the scope of this feasibility study, including those traded animals which are bred in captivity, and also learn from the member states we heard that already have a positive list and what can be improved there. We know that there is a feasible legal basis under Article 114 of the EU Treaty. Let's ensure that it is included in the feasibility assessment, and let's explore how an EU positive list can be included in kept animal regulation. I really would like to thank you very much for coming, and to Animal Advocacy and Protection and the Eurogroup for Animals and my team, especially Srinka, for organizing this event. And I'm not only looking forward to a feasibility study, but also to a positive list at EU level, which is paramount for animal welfare and for our health. Thank you very much.
Okay, I will not keep you from your sandwiches for long, but really just to say thank you to Manuela and to Pascal for hosting this event. I've also learned a lot. And look, just to finish, there's been two stories in the last week. In fact, a month ago, there was 3 sloths that died in a plane. We found in our online investigations a sloth for sale on the EU pet trade. We've got this terrible story of a white tiger found in Greece. A baby white tiger. And in fact, this tiger cub is going to live the rest of its life in significant pain. That was found out this morning. This is currently legal in some countries in the EU. And just this week, a news story where 3 meerkats have gone missing in the Netherlands. Now, meerkats will likely not be on the list in the Netherlands. So hopefully, in a few years, these kinds of stories will not be happening. And we heard about demand reduction. Well, I was sitting with the European Commission a few days ago discussing demand reduction of exotic pet trade. And I think that this goes to show that legislation can really play an important part in that. So just thank you to the panelists. It's been really lovely to meet you all. And thank you to our speakers as well, and our keynote speaker, David. And thank you to all of the people who have helped with developing the white paper. It's been a real team effort, and I really appreciate everybody's help. And thank you very much for the Commission for coming and listening to us, and for staying for so long. I'm going to stop now because it is 1:05. So, thank you. Oh, and
thank you, Nick.
And we're going to take a photo over here with the panelists, and then outside we're going to take a photo with everybody if you want to. Okay, so 2 photos, one with the panelists here.
I think you're messing things up. Let's.
I'm under instructions, so. Okay. Yeah, 2 photos, sorry. One with the panelists over here and one with everybody over there. Thank you very much. Okay, thanks a lot, everybody.
so nice surrounding with the flag and everything.
Yes, of course.
A nice photo there with
My
the
team
pen and
was
this.
happily gesturing. No.
I'm messing up everything.
It's hard to telepathy over there.
I mean, but these breeders that contacted me, they're doing a fish breeding, you know. I mean, and they say, yeah, we love animals and we are animal protectors, so now your positive list will endanger everything. But I mean, if this fish is on a positive list, they have nothing to fear about, don't they?
No, then sure not. And if it isn't, well, what they really don't want is to become a zoo in the sense of the zoo directive, because then they really have to apply to regulations that are quite strict. But that's the only way you can ensure that animal welfare. So
I'm on your side here.
that was